The most dangerous lies are not the ones shouted in anger, but the ones whispered when someone believes you are no longer listening. Naomi Brooks stood in the soft golden light of her Manhattan penthouse kitchen, one hand resting on the marble counter, the other holding her phone close to her ear long after her husband's voice had faded into what should have been silence. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, New York glittered like a promise made by someone who had never intended to keep it. 30 stories below, yellow cabs moved along Park Avenue like streams of fire, and the city carried on with its usual confidence, unaware that inside one of its most beautiful apartments, a woman's entire life had just begun to crack without making a sound. Ethan Whitmore had called 10 minutes earlier, his voice smooth, polished, almost tender. He told her the board meeting was running late. He told her not to wait up if she was tired. He told her he loved her, the same way he said it during interviews, charity dinners, and anniversary speeches, with warmth placed carefully in all the right corners. Naomi had smiled then, because 6 years of marriage had taught her how to hear love even when it sounded rehearsed. On the dining table behind her, 2 ivory candles burned beside a simple dinner she had cooked herself: roasted chicken with rosemary, garlic mashed potatoes, green beans with almonds, and the peach cobbler her mother used to make on Sunday evenings in Brooklyn. It was not the kind of meal the Whitmore family usually served under crystal chandeliers, but it was real. That had always mattered to Naomi. Real food, real hands, real love. Beside the plates lay the navy blue dress she planned to wear to tomorrow night's education gala, folded across the back of a chair. Her mother, Grace Brooks, had helped alter it by hand, saying the color made Naomi look like calm water under moonlight. Vanessa Hale, Ethan's communications advisor, had called it too plain. Ethan had only said, "Maybe wear something more memorable." Naomi had laughed it off. She had become very good at laughing off small cuts before they became visible wounds. Then Ethan said goodbye. Or he thought. He did. The call did not end. Naomi lowered the phone, ready to tap the screen, when another voice slipped through the speaker. Vanessa's voice. Light. Confident. Too close. "She bought the story again," Vanessa said. Naomi froze. The refrigerator hummed softly behind her. A candle flickered. Somewhere in the apartment, the anniversary clock Ethan had given her ticked with elegant cruelty. Then came Ethan's answer, colder than she had ever heard it. "After the gala, we can end it." The marriage did what it was supposed to do. Naomi did not breathe. She did not blink. She only stood there as the room tilted quietly around her. Vanessa laughed under her breath. The Naomi effect worked better than anyone expected. The billionaire husband, the black wife with the community background, the scholarship kids, the redemption angle. People love that kind of image. Image. The word entered Naomi like winter air under a locked door. She looked at the framed photograph on the console table. Ethan holding her hand at the opening of the Brooks Hope Reading Center. Cameras flashing while children waved paper stars behind them. That day, he had called her his conscience. His heart. His reason to believe money could still do good. She remembered believing him. She remembered the first time he visited her old neighborhood and told her that her kindness made him feel human again. She remembered every dinner where wealthy strangers studied her like a symbol instead of speaking to her like a person. She remembered every time Ethan squeezed her hand beneath the table, not to comfort her, but to keep her smiling. On the phone, Vanessa continued, "Tomorrow night has to be perfect. Once the Human Dignity Fund confirms the chairmanship, we control the narrative. After that, the separation can be framed as mutual growth." Ethan sighed, not with guilt, but impatience. Naomi will be fine. She always lands on her feet. A strange calm settled over her then. Not peace, not forgiveness. Something sharper, something clean. Naomi placed the phone on the counter and pressed record on her second device with hands that no longer trembled. Her reflection stared back from the dark window glass. A black woman in a cream sweater, her curls pinned loosely, her eyes steady, her wedding ring catching the candlelight like a question that had finally found its answer. For 6 years, she had tried to be gracious in rooms built to misunderstand her. She had softened her voice, adjusted her clothes, smiled through jokes that were not jokes, and carried the weight of being both wife and proof that Ethan Whitmore had a soul. But tonight, while the city shone beneath her like a stage, Naomi understood the truth with painful clarity. He had forgotten to end the call. But she had finally heard enough to end the lie. Naomi did not sleep that night. She moved through the penthouse with the quiet discipline of a woman who had learned long ago that panic rarely saves anyone, but clarity can. The candles on the dining table burned low until their flames became small blue halos, and the roasted chicken cooled beneath its silver cover, untouched, unnecessary, almost ceremonial now. She saved the recording, backed it up, and placed her phone face down beside the wedding ring she had not yet removed. Then she sat at the table in the chair Ethan usually occupied and looked across the empty place, setting at the life she had been told to call beautiful. 6 years. That was how long she had lived inside the Whitmore name. How long she had walked through rooms where people smiled at her earrings and questioned her education, praised her poise and ignored her ideas, admired her story and never once asked what it cost her to survive it. In public, Ethan had always reached for her hand at the perfect moment. At museum openings, hospital fundraisers, literacy campaigns, and black-tie dinners, he knew exactly when to place his palm at the small of her back, exactly when to lower his voice and say, "My wife taught me that privilege means responsibility." The cameras loved that sentence. Donors loved it more. Naomi used to love it too, before she noticed he only said it when a microphone was near. Their beginning had not felt false. That was what hurt most. She had met Ethan at a community education summit in Harlem, where she had been presenting a small but powerful proposal for after-school reading centers in underserved neighborhoods. She had worn a navy blazer from a discount store and shoes that pinched by noon. But when she spoke about children being more than numbers on a grant form, the room had gone still. Ethan had approached her afterward, not with the lazy confidence of a man used to buying attention, but with something that looked almost like wonder. "You made every person in that room feel accountable," he had said. She remembered the exact warmth of his voice. She remembered thinking that power, when humbled, could become useful. Their courtship unfolded like a carefully lit dream. Dinner in quiet restaurants. Walks through Central Park when autumn leaves gathered at their feet. Surprise visits to Brooklyn, where Grace Brooks served sweet tea in mason jars and studied Ethan with the cautious eyes of a mother who had seen charm mistaken for character too many times. Still, Ethan tried. He listened when Grace spoke about teaching 3rd grade for 31 years. He helped carry folding chairs after Naomi's weekend tutoring program. He promised he did not want to rescue Naomi from her world. He said he wanted to stand beside her in it. That promise became the foundation she built her trust on. Brick by brick, year by year. But foundations can crack quietly. The first crack came during a Whitmore family luncheon in Connecticut when Ethan's aunt said Naomi was surprisingly articulate, and the table went still for the wrong reason. Naomi waited for Ethan to correct her. He only reached for his water glass and changed the subject. Later, in the car, he kissed her hand and said his aunt was from another generation. Naomi had stared out at the long white fences passing by and told herself patience was also a form of love. The second crack came when Vanessa joined Whitmore Capital as a communication strategist. Vanessa was elegant in the way expensive rooms are elegant, polished without warmth, bright without light. She began shaping Ethan's public identity around philanthropy, humility, and social awareness. Naomi's work became central to that image. Her childhood photographs appeared in campaign decks. Her reading center appeared in interviews. Her mother's teaching career became a paragraph in Ethan's speeches. Naomi objected once, softly. Ethan told her, "Your story inspires people." She wanted to believe inspiration and exploitation were not standing so close together. By dawn, the city had turned silver. Naomi rose from Ethan's chair and walked to the window. Her reflection looked composed, but her heart felt like a room after guests had left, full of overturned glasses and things no one wanted to name. She touched the wedding ring, turning it slowly around her finger. She had not married money. She had married the man she believed was brave enough to respect where she came from. Now she understood the difference between being loved and being displayed. Love protects your dignity when no one is watching. Display only holds your hand when the cameras arrive. By 7 in the morning, Naomi had stopped asking herself whether she had misunderstood. The recording was clear. Ethan's voice, Vanessa's laughter, the calm language of people who had turned a marriage into a business asset and expected the woman inside it to remain grateful. She sat at the small writing desk near the windows, The same desk where she had once written scholarship recommendation letters for students who believed college was a distant country they could only dream of reaching. The city below had awakened into horns, footsteps, delivery trucks, and coffee cups moving through tired hands. Inside the penthouse, everything looked untouched. The white roses Ethan's assistant had ordered for their anniversary stood in a glass vase. The silver-framed wedding portrait smiled from the hallway. Her navy blue dress waited over the chair like a quiet witness. Naomi opened her laptop. She did not go first to social media. She did not search Ethan's name. She opened the shared foundation drive, the one Vanessa's team had given her access to months earlier, so she could review language when needed. That phrase made her mouth tighten now. When needed. As if her own life story were a document someone else could edit for tone. Folder after folder appeared on the screen, each labeled with the clean, bloodless language of public relations, donor strategy, public empathy, gala remarks, community impact visuals. Then she saw it. The Naomi effect. For a moment, she simply stared at the title. 3 words, perfectly capitalized, sitting in the middle of the screen like a door she already knew would open into something cold. She clicked. The presentation loaded slowly, each slide arriving with professional beauty. Her childhood street in Brooklyn. Her mother standing in front of a public school classroom. Naomi reading to a group of second graders at the first Brooks Hope program. Ethan beside her, sleeves rolled up, smiling as if compassion had been tailored to fit him. Beneath the images were notes written in Vanessa's precise style. Emphasize contrast between inherited wealth and lived experience. Position Naomi as moral anchor. Highlight cross-cultural marriage as proof of inclusive leadership. Avoid language suggesting dependency. Maintain visual warmth. Naomi read each line without moving. Somewhere in the kitchen, the coffee maker beeped 3 times, but she did not rise. Her hands remained flat on the desk. She had expected betrayal to feel like a storm. Instead, it felt like a library where every book had been rewritten while she was sleeping. There were quotes she had never approved, memories arranged like furniture, photographs taken from private family events, and placed into donor packages. One slide showed a picture of Grace Brooks laughing at a neighborhood picnic, paper plate in hand, her silver curls bright in the sun. Under it, a note read, "Use mother figure to reinforce authenticity." Naomi closed her eyes. Not for sadness. For control. Her mother was not an accessory. Her neighborhood was not a texture. Her kindness was not a costume Ethan could wear to make powerful people feel safe around his ambition. She opened another file. Draft separation timeline. Her breath slowed. The plan was dated 2 months earlier. 2 months. While Ethan had kissed her forehead before meetings. While he had thanked her for helping refine his gala speech. While he had stood beside her at the reading center and called the children our shared purpose. The document outlined everything. With quiet efficiency. Announced mutual separation after chairmanship vote. Express continued admiration. Protect Ethan from allegations of image exploitation. Offer Naomi advisory role with limited public comment. Limited public comment. Naomi leaned back in her chair and looked toward the dining table, where her wedding ring still circled her finger, bright and obedient. For years, she had taught young women to read contracts before signing them, to recognize when opportunity came with invisible strings, to never confuse access with respect. Yet here she was, inside a gilded room, discovering the invisible strings tied around her own name. A softer woman might have collapsed. A louder woman might have called Ethan immediately. Naomi did neither. She printed the documents. 1 page at a time. The machine whispered in the corner, feeding out proof in warm sheets of paper. She placed each page into a navy folder, the same color as the dress Vanessa had dismissed. Then she copied the files to a secure drive and emailed them to herself, her attorney, and an old friend from graduate school who now worked in nonprofit ethics compliance. Her message was only 1 sentence. Please review these materials and advise me on protecting the students, the foundation, and my mother's name. When she pressed send, the apartment seemed to exhale. Naomi stood and finally removed the wedding ring. She did not throw it. She did not curse it. She placed it in a small porcelain bowl beside her mother's handwritten recipe card for peach cobbler. The contrast almost made her smile. One thing had been purchased to impress the world. The other had been passed down to feed people with love. By 8:30, Ethan texted that he would be home before noon to rehearse for the gala. Naomi looked at the message, then at the navy folder waiting on the table. For the first time since the call, her heart did not feel broken. It felt awake. By 11:45, the penthouse had returned to its polished stillness, the kind of stillness money could buy but never warm. Naomi had cleared the anniversary dinner, washed the crystal glasses, folded the linen napkins, and placed the navy folder at the center of the dining table where Ethan could not miss it. She did not do these things because she wanted the room to look perfect. She did them because order helped her remember who she was. Outside, winter sunlight spread across Manhattan in pale sheets, touching the glass towers, the crowded sidewalks, the black cars waiting along the curb like patient secrets. Naomi wore the navy blue dress, not the designer gown Vanessa had sent over with a handwritten note that said, "More camera-friendly." Not the silver dress Ethan preferred because it photographed well beside his tuxedo. She wore the dress her mother had altered with careful hands, the one that carried no brand name, only love. Her curls were pinned softly at the back of her head. Her face was calm. Her ring was no longer on her finger. It rested in the porcelain bowl beside Grace Brooks's recipe card, two different kinds of inheritance sitting quietly together. When Ethan entered, he brought the cold air with him. His charcoal overcoat was open, his tie loosened just enough to suggest a man too important to have ordinary mornings. For a second, he smiled the easy public smile that had once made donors lean forward and reporters soften their questions. Then he saw the table, the folder, the ring. Naomi standing beside the window with her hands folded in front of her. His smile disappeared 1 inch at a time. "Naomi," he said carefully, "what is this?" She looked at him, really looked at him, and wondered how many times love had taught her to translate warning signs into excuses. "Sit down, Ethan." He laughed once, softly, as if she had surprised him. "I have 15 minutes before Vanessa gets here. We need to go over tomorrow night's remarks." "No," Naomi said. One word. Quiet. Final. Ethan stopped removing his gloves. The apartment seemed to narrow around them. "Excuse me." Naomi walked to the table and rested her fingertips on the navy folder. "When did you stop seeing me as your wife?" His expression tightened, not with grief, but calculation. She recognized it now. The pause before strategy. The search for the safest sentence. "I do not know what you think you heard or saw, but this is clearly becoming emotional. Do not make my clarity sound like instability." The words landed cleanly between them. Ethan blinked. Naomi opened the folder and turned the first page toward him. The Naomi effect. His eyes moved across the title, then away from it too quickly. "That is internal language. You were never supposed to see that. That is the first honest thing you have said since you walked in." He exhaled and dragged a hand through his hair. "This is not what you think. Communications teams label things. They build narratives. That is how institutions survive." Naomi studied him with a calm that frightened him more than tears would have. "People tell stories, Ethan. You used a person." The silence that followed was not empty. It was crowded with every dinner where she had been asked to perform grace, every photograph taken without permission, every speech where Ethan borrowed her pain and called it purpose. He reached for the folder, but she placed her hand on it. Not forcefully, just enough. "My mother's name is in here. My students' faces are in here. My childhood is in here. Tell me which part of that belongs to your institution." Ethan's jaw shifted. "I was trying to do something good with what we had." "No," Naomi said. "You were trying to look good with what I had survived." His face changed then, just briefly. A crack in the marble. Shame, maybe. Or fear. It vanished almost as quickly as it came. "Naomi, tomorrow night matters. If you walk into that gala distant or angry, people will notice. The chairmanship vote could be affected. The foundation could lose funding. The children you care about could lose support." There it was. The oldest cage dressed as concern. Naomi almost smiled at how familiar it sounded. "Behave, and people will help you. Smile, and your community will be protected. Stay quiet, and they might let you keep the crumbs." She picked up the printed separation timeline and held it where he could see the date. "You planned to leave me 2 months ago and still let me help write your speech about dignity." Ethan looked down. It was complicated. No, it was convenient. His phone buzzed. Vanessa's name lit the screen. Neither of them moved. The sound filled the room, small and insulting. Ethan silenced it. "What do you want from me?" he asked. Naomi looked toward the window, where the city kept shining as if nothing sacred had been mishandled above it. Then she turned back to him, her voice steady as stone underwater. I want my name removed from every strategy document. I want my mother's image pulled from your donor materials. I want every student photo reviewed and protected. I want the Brooks Hope funds legally separated from Whitmore Capital before tomorrow night. Ethan stared at her. That is impossible in 24 hours. Then begin. And us? He asked, the words sounding unfamiliar in his mouth. Naomi glanced at the porcelain bowl. The ring caught the light one last time. There was no us in that folder. He stepped toward her then, softer, careful, almost the man from Harlem again. I loved you. Naomi did not step back, but something in her eyes closed the door. Maybe you loved what standing beside me made you believe about yourself. Ethan had no answer. For once, the man who owned towers, shaped headlines, and turned silence into policy could not buy his way out of a sentence. Naomi picked up the navy folder and walked past him toward the bedroom, where one small suitcase waited open on the bench. She had packed only what belonged to her before the Whitmore name taught people to price her. As she passed, Ethan whispered, "Where will you go?" Naomi paused at the doorway. "Somewhere I do not have to be useful to be respected." Naomi left the penthouse at 1:17 in the afternoon, not because she was running, but because staying would have turned her dignity into a negotiation. The elevator doors opened with a soft silver sigh, and she stepped inside carrying one small suitcase, one navy folder, her laptop bag, and the kind of calm that comes only after a woman has stopped asking permission to believe what she already knows. Ethan stood in the hallway behind her, his overcoat still on, his face pale beneath the expensive confidence he had worn for most of his life. For a moment, he looked less like the man who owned half a skyline and more like a boy watching the lights go out in a house he had never learned to care for properly. "Naomi," he said, but her name sounded different now, stripped of cameras, speeches, and applause. She pressed the lobby button. The doors began to close. He took one step forward, then stopped, as if some part of him understood that following her would not be love. It would be control wearing a softer coat. The last thing she saw was his reflection splitting across the polished metal, divided into pieces. Then the doors closed. Downstairs, the doorman, Mr. Alvarez, rose from behind his desk when he saw her suitcase. He had worked in the building for 12 years and had always treated Naomi with the quiet respect many guests forgot to offer. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said gently, "would you like me to call the car?" Naomi almost corrected the name. "Not yet. Not here. No, thank you. I will take a cab." Outside, the December air touched her face with clean honesty. No perfume, no chandelier warmth, no careful language. Just cold wind, traffic, roasted chestnuts from a cart near the corner, and the steady pulse of a city that did not pause because one heart had learned the truth. Naomi stood at the curb in her navy dress and camel coat, her suitcase beside her, and lifted her hand for a yellow cab. People passed without recognizing her. For the first time in years, that felt like mercy. The driver was a middle-aged woman with silver hoops and gospel music playing softly from the dashboard. "Where to, honey?" she asked. Naomi looked back once at the tower rising behind her, 30 stories of glass reflecting a sky that had already moved on. "Brooklyn," she said. "Bedford-Stuyvesant." The ride across the bridge felt longer than it was. Manhattan receded behind her, all sharp edges and glittering promises, while Brooklyn opened ahead in brick, bodegas, schoolyards, brownstone steps, and memories that had never asked her to be impressive before they welcomed her home. Her mother's house sat on a tree-lined block where winter branches scratched softly against gray sky. The steps were uneven. The black iron railing needed paint. A ceramic angel still watched over the front window, the same one Grace Brooks had. Bought at a church sale when Naomi was 10. Before Naomi could knock, the door opened. Grace stood there in a cardigan the color of oatmeal, her silver curls loose around her face, her eyes taking in the suitcase, the dress, the folder, the absence of the ring. Mothers know how to read what daughters have not yet survived saying. "Come in, baby," Grace said. "No questions. Not yet. Just room." The house smelled like lemon oil, cinnamon, and old books. Naomi set her suitcase by the staircase and placed the navy folder on the kitchen table where she had done homework as a girl. The table was smaller than she remembered, its wooden surface marked by decades of meals, bills, lesson plans, birthday cakes, and conversations that had raised her better than wealth ever could. Grace poured tea into 2 mugs. Naomi wrapped her hands around one and finally felt the first tremor move through her fingers. Grace sat across from her. Did he forget your worth, or did he never learn how to see it? The question was soft, but it opened something honest. Naomi looked down at the tea, amber and steady. He used us, Mama. You. The children. My work. My story. He turned all of it into a campaign. Grace closed her eyes for 1 second. When she opened them, there was pain there, but not surprise. Some people admire light only because it makes them look better standing near it. Naomi swallowed hard. I should have seen it sooner. No, Grace said, firm now. Do not punish yourself for trusting someone who studied how to sound trustworthy. Those words settled over Naomi like a blanket pulled around cold shoulders. Outside, a school bus sighed to a stop. Children laughed on the sidewalk, bright and careless, carrying backpacks nearly as large as their bodies. Naomi watched them through the kitchen window and thought of every student whose photograph had been placed in Ethan's documents like decoration. The ache in her chest sharpened into purpose. By evening, her attorney had responded. The materials raised serious ethical concerns. The student images could be protected. The foundation assets could be reviewed. Public statements should be careful, factual, and centered on safeguarding the community. Naomi read the email twice, then closed her laptop. Ethan called 6 times. Vanessa called 3. Unknown numbers began appearing after sunset. Naomi answered none of them. She helped her mother warm soup, changed into sweatpants and an old Howard University sweatshirt, and sat at the kitchen table drafting a list of every family, teacher, and student whose privacy needed protection before the gala lights came on. Grace placed a hand on her shoulder. You came home with 1 suitcase, she said, but you did not come home empty. Naomi looked at the navy folder, then at the window where Brooklyn's streetlights glowed like patient stars. The penthouse had been quiet because it was hollow. This little house was quiet because it was safe. And for the first time in 6 years, Naomi slept under a roof where nobody needed her pain to make themselves look kind. By sunrise, the story had already begun to move without Naomi's permission. It started as a whisper on a society blog, then became a polished paragraph in an online business column, then 100 comments from strangers who had never sat at her kitchen table but felt qualified to measure her gratitude. Sources close to Whitmore Capital described the separation as sudden. One anonymous insider suggested Naomi had been overwhelmed by the pressures of public life. Another claimed Ethan had done everything possible to support her charitable work. By 9 o'clock, Vanessa's fingerprints were everywhere, invisible to most people, obvious to Naomi. The language was too smooth, too careful, too cruel in its softness. No one called Naomi unstable. They only implied she was fragile. No one called her ungrateful. They only praised Ethan's generosity so loudly that silence around her sounded like accusation. Grace read one article at the kitchen table, her glasses low on her nose, her mouth set in a line Naomi knew from childhood. It was the look her mother wore when a school board member tried to cut music programs and call it efficiency. They are trying to make you look small without getting their hands dirty, Grace said. Naomi poured coffee into a chipped blue mug and opened her laptop. Then I will not. Give them mud to work with. Her attorney advised restraint. Her old friend from nonprofit compliance advised documentation. Her own heart, bruised but awake, advised purpose. So Naomi wrote a statement of 3 sentences, no more, no less. She did not mention betrayal. She did not mention the recording. She did not mention Vanessa. She wrote, my immediate priority is protecting the privacy and dignity of the students, families, and educators connected to Brooks Hope. I am reviewing the use of personal images and stories in all public materials. Every child deserves support without becoming a prop for anyone's reputation. She read it aloud once. Grace nodded. That sounds like you. Naomi posted it at 10:15. By noon, the tone of the conversation had shifted. Teachers shared it. Parents shared it. Former students shared photographs of books Naomi had bought for classrooms, college essays she had reviewed after midnight, winter coats quietly delivered when families could not afford them. Not one post was dramatic. That made them stronger. Truth does not always need a spotlight. Sometimes it enters through ordinary doors carrying receipts, memories, and names. Vanessa responded by releasing a glossy statement from Whitmore Capital expressing continued admiration for Naomi's community contributions and deep concern for all parties during a sensitive personal transition. Naomi stared at the words and felt nothing. That was new. Once, Ethan's public language had been able to pull her back into confusion. Now she could see the seams. Admiration without accountability. Concern without respect. Warmth without truth. By evening, donors began emailing Brooks Hope directly, asking whether their contributions had been managed through Whitmore Capital or through Naomi's original nonprofit accounts. Naomi answered every message carefully with help from her attorney. No bitterness. No accusation. Just facts. Names. Dates. Boundaries. She worked at the same small kitchen table where Grace had once graded spelling tests, wearing her old Howard University sweatshirt, her curls tied up with a scarf, her face lit by the blue glow of a laptop. Outside, Brooklyn moved. Through its ordinary miracles, a father carrying groceries in one hand and his daughter's backpack in the other, teenagers laughing too loudly near the corner store, Mrs. Alvarez from next door sweeping perfectly clean steps because pride had its own rhythm. This was the world Ethan had photographed but never fully understood. People here did not need to be rescued for a campaign. They needed resources, respect, and decisions made with them, not about them. The next morning, Naomi filed the paperwork to legally separate Brooks Hope from any Whitmore-controlled entity. It was complicated. It was expensive. It was necessary. When the bank officer asked if she was sure, Naomi looked through the glass wall at a young mother filling out forms with a toddler asleep against her shoulder. Yes, she said, I am sure. Over the next several weeks, the smear campaign lost its shine. Vanessa could make Naomi look emotional, but she could not make her look dishonest. Ethan could delay signatures, but he could not stop teachers from speaking. Reporters began asking different questions. Why had private student images appeared in donor decks? Who approved the use of Grace Brooks's photograph? Why was a community foundation so closely tied to a billionaire's leadership campaign? Naomi did not celebrate the pressure. She stayed focused. She rented a small office above a bakery on Fulton Street, where the smell of warm bread rose through the floorboards every morning. She placed 3 things on her desk: the navy folder, her mother's recipe card, and a handwritten note from a 9th-grade girl named Talia, who had once written, Miss Naomi, you made college feel like a place with my name on the door. That sentence became the seed. Not for revenge, for rebuilding. Naomi called it the Brooks Dignity Initiative. It would provide scholarship coaching, financial literacy workshops, mentorship for young women of color, and seminars on recognizing manipulation in relationships, workplaces, and institutions. The first session had 12 girls, 2 folding tables, a borrowed projector, and Grace serving lemonade in paper cups. Naomi stood before them in simple black pants and a white blouse. No cameras, no donors, no Ethan. The world may try to turn your story into something useful for someone else, she told them. Your job is to remember that your life belongs to you before it belongs to any room you enter. A girl in the front row raised her hand. How do you know when someone respects you? Naomi paused. The question passed through every room she had survived. Then she smiled gently. Respect does not require you to disappear, so someone else can feel comfortable. The girls wrote that down. Grace wiped her eyes near the doorway and pretended she was adjusting the cups. That night, after the students left and the bakery downstairs turned off its lights, Naomi stood alone in the little office. No marble floors. No skyline view. No crystal chandelier. Only a humming radiator, a stack of applications, and 12 young women who had walked out holding their shoulders a little higher. Her phone buzzed once. Ethan's name appeared on the screen. She let it fade. Some calls no longer had the power to summon her. Outside the window, Brooklyn glowed with winter rain, and Naomi understood something she wished every woman could learn before pain taught it the hard way. Dignity is not what remains after you lose everything. Dignity is what tells you what was never worth keeping. 1 year later, the Grand Ellington Hotel looked exactly as Naomi remembered it, which somehow made everything different. The same marble staircase, curved beneath the same crystal chandeliers. The same gold-framed mirrors reflected gowns, tuxedos, pearl earrings, polished shoes, and practiced smiles. The same kind of soft piano music floated above the crowd, gentle enough to make Wealth feel innocent. But Naomi Brooks did not enter through the side hallway this time. She did not stand behind Ethan Whitmore, waiting for a photographer to ask them to lean closer. She did not smooth her dress because someone else had decided how she should be seen. She walked through the main doors with Grace Brooks beside her, their arms linked, their steps steady, their names printed clearly on the program for the Human Dignity Awards. Naomi wore the navy blue dress again, not because she owned nothing finer now, but because she understood the power of returning as yourself to a room that once tried to edit you. Grace had pressed the fabric that morning with the same careful hands that had once packed Naomi's school lunches before sunrise. "This dress has history," Grace had said, smoothing the hem. "Let them meet the woman who survived it." The past year had changed Naomi in ways that did not need diamonds to announce themselves. The Brooks Dignity Initiative had grown from 12 girls in a borrowed room above a bakery to more than 300 students across Brooklyn, Queens, and Newark. Volunteers included teachers, attorneys, financial counselors, college advisors, and women who had once sat in expensive rooms feeling invisible. The workshops taught scholarship applications, credit basics, workplace boundaries, interview skills, and the simple but revolutionary truth that opportunity should never require surrendering self-respect. Naomi had not built an empire to impress Ethan. She had built a shelter with doors wide enough for others to walk through. As she crossed the ballroom, conversations softened around her. Some people recognized her from interviews she had reluctantly agreed to give once the student privacy investigation became public. Some remembered her from the old Whitmore events and looked away with the discomfort of people who had applauded the wrong story. Others simply watched because dignity has its own gravity. It does not beg for attention. It changes the air until attention comes to it. Near the donor wall, Ethan stood in a black tuxedo, one hand resting at his side, the other holding a glass of water he had not touched. He looked older. Not dramatically, just honestly. The sharp polish remained, but something behind it had dulled, as if applause had stopped feeding the part of him that knew it was hungry for the wrong things. Vanessa was not beside him. Her firm had quietly lost the Whitmore account after the ethics review revealed unauthorized use of family photographs and student stories. Ethan had stepped down from the chairmanship race before the vote, calling it a personal decision. The newspapers called it strategic. Naomi called it consequences. Their eyes met across the room. Once, that look would have pulled her into old obligations. Smile. Soften. Make him comfortable. Protect the evening. Protect the image. Tonight, she only nodded once, not coldly, not warmly, but with the distance owed to a chapter that had ended. Ethan lowered his eyes first. Grace leaned close and whispered, "You all right?" Naomi smiled, and this time nothing in the smile was borrowed. "I am." They were seated near the front, not as guests of Whitmore Capital, but as honorees. At their table sat Talia, now a high school senior with acceptance letters from 3 colleges, Mrs. Alvarez from the Neighborhood Parent Council, and Mr. Donovan, a retired banker who volunteered every Saturday teaching young people how to read financial aid letters without fear. There were no props at that table. Only people. Only work. Only proof. When Naomi's name was announced, the applause rose slowly, then fully, filling the ballroom until even the chandeliers seemed to tremble with light. She stood, touched her mother's shoulder, and walked toward the stage. Each step carried a memory. The old penthouse kitchen, the Navy folder, the cab ride over the bridge, the first workshop with 12 girls, and paper cups of lemonade. The night she sold a pair of designer shoes to pay for printing flyers. The morning a mother cried because her daughter received a full scholarship. The hundreds of quiet victories no gala could properly hold. At the podium, Naomi looked out at the room. She saw Ethan in the 3rd row, his face unreadable, his hands folded tightly. She saw donors, educators, reporters, students, mothers, fathers, and young women watching her with the kind of attention that does not consume but receives. The award rested beside the microphone, glass and silver catching the light. Naomi did not touch it yet. "My mother taught 3rd grade for 31 years, she began, her voice calm and clear. She used to say that every child can tell the difference between being helped and being handled. A quiet stillness settled. Naomi continued, "For a long time, I thought access was the same as respect. I thought being invited. into powerful rooms meant those rooms had made space for me. But a chair at the table means very little if your voice is only welcome when it serves someone else's comfort. In the third row, Ethan looked down. Naomi did not pause for him. This was not his punishment. It was her truth. The Brooks Dignity Initiative exists because young people deserve more than charity with cameras attached. They deserve privacy. They deserve tools. They deserve adults who do not turn their hardships into decoration. And most of all, they deserve to know that their worth does not begin when someone powerful notices them. The applause came before she finished, but she raised one gentle hand, and the room quieted again. Her eyes moved to the students seated near Grace. If you remember nothing else tonight, remember this. Never shrink your soul to fit inside someone else's version of kindness. Real kindness makes room for your whole self. Then she lifted the award, not like a trophy, but like a promise. The room stood. Grace cried openly now, one hand over her heart. Talia clapped until her palms turned red. Ethan remained seated for 1 second longer than everyone else, not out of disrespect, but because the weight of what he had lost seemed to hold him there. Then he stood too, slowly, finally applauding without owning the moment. Under the lights, Naomi Brooks smiled at her mother, at her students, at the life she had rebuilt from the pieces others had tried to use. The ballroom was the same. The woman standing inside it was not. After the applause faded, the room did not return to what it had been. Something had shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet permanence of a door closing behind the truth. Naomi stepped down from the stage holding the award in both hands, and people who had once spoken around her now waited to speak to her. A university dean asked about expanding the Brooks Dignity Initiative to campus mentorship programs. A retired judge offered legal workshops for students aging out of foster care. A mother in a silver dress touched Naomi's arm and said her daughter had watched the speech from the live stream and cried because someone had finally said what she had felt for years. Naomi thanked each person with grace, but she did not perform gratitude like a debt. She received their words standing upright, no longer surprised that respect could enter a room when she stopped apologizing for deserving it. Across the ballroom, Ethan remained near the donor wall, as if the marble floor had become difficult to cross. He watched Naomi speak with students, teachers, and community leaders, watched her laugh when Grace whispered something in her ear, watched Talia proudly introduce herself to a college president without looking down at her shoes. Every scene was familiar and impossible. He had seen Naomi in beautiful rooms before. He had seen her under lights, beside microphones, holding flowers, smiling for cameras. But he had never seen her free inside one. The difference unsettled him more than public criticism ever had. Criticism could be managed. Loss could not. His phone buzzed with messages from board members, reporters, and people who used concern as a polite disguise for curiosity. He ignored them. For the first time in his adult life, Ethan Whitmore had no statement prepared. No angle. No narrative. Only memory. Naomi at the Harlem Education Summit, speaking with such clear conviction that he had forgotten the donor seated beside him. Naomi kneeling beside a little boy at the first reading center, helping him sound out a sentence until his whole face lit up. Naomi in his family's Connecticut dining room, smiling politely after an insult he had been too cowardly to challenge. Naomi in their penthouse, asking when he stopped seeing her as his wife. He had wanted to say never. Even now, some selfish part of him still wanted that answer to be true. But honesty, once awakened, becomes merciless. He had stopped seeing her by degrees. First as inspiration, then as proof, then as protection. He had turned her goodness into shelter from his own ambition and called it partnership because that sounded kinder. Near the edge of the ballroom, an older man from the foundation board approached Ethan and spoke quietly about rebuilding public trust. Ethan heard the words, nodded at the correct moments, and understood with sudden exhaustion that public trust was not the thing he most needed to rebuild. A waiter passed with champagne. Ethan took water instead. His eyes found Naomi again. She was standing beside a display of student letters, reading one aloud to Grace. Her voice softened on the last line, and Grace pressed her hand to her chest. Ethan remembered the first time he had visited that kitchen in Brooklyn, remembered Grace handing him peach cobbler and telling him, "Do not confuse my daughter's kindness with permission to take from her." He had laughed then, charmed by the warning. He had not been wise enough to fear it. The program ended close to 10 o'clock. Guests began drifting toward the exits, carrying gift bags, business cards, and the glow of an evening that had become more than ceremony. Naomi stood near the coat check with Grace and Talia when Ethan finally approached. He moved slowly, stopping several feet away, leaving space where once he would have assumed access. Grace saw him first. Her expression did not harden. It simply became still. Talia looked from Ethan to Naomi and quietly excused herself to find Mrs. Alvarez. Naomi turned. For a moment, neither spoke. The hotel's golden light rested on them both, but it did not make them equal. Not anymore. Your speech was extraordinary, Ethan said. His voice was low, stripped of the polished certainty she remembered. It was necessary, Naomi replied. He nodded, accepting the correction. I know I have no right to ask for your time. Then do not ask as if you do. The sentence was calm. It did not wound. It established a border. Ethan looked down at his hands. I am sorry, Naomi. Not because the world found out. Not because the vote collapsed. Not because Vanessa left and the board questioned me. I am sorry because I used what was sacred to you and convinced myself it was service. Naomi watched him carefully. Apologies can be another form of performance when spoken by men accustomed to being forgiven on schedule. But there was no audience leaning close now. No cameras. No Vanessa. Only the low hum of hotel staff clearing tables and the soft rustle of coats being lifted from hangers. What changed, she asked. Ethan swallowed. I saw them listening to you tonight. The students. Your mother. The people who know your work without needing my name attached to it. And I realized I spent years standing beside something real while trying to make it look useful. His eyes lifted to hers. I do not expect you to come back. The words surprised her, not because they were enough, but because they were the first ones that did not try to claim her. Good, Naomi said gently. Because I am not coming back. Pain crossed his face, quiet and deserved. He nodded once. I know. From inside his jacket, he removed an envelope and held it out, then stopped before placing it in her hand. This is not a donation announcement. It is not for publicity. It is a legal transfer of the remaining Brooks Hope funds into your independent foundation account, plus reimbursement for every unauthorized campaign expense tied to your name or the students. Your attorney already has a copy. You can refuse it, redirect it, or audit it. I will not attach my name. Naomi did not take the envelope immediately. She looked at him for a long second, seeing not redemption completed, but perhaps the first honest brick laid where image used to stand. Repair is not the same as repentance, she said. Ethan nodded. I am learning that. Learn quietly. He almost smiled, but did not allow himself the comfort. I will. Grace stepped beside Naomi then, her presence warm and immovable. Ethan looked at her. Mrs. Brooks, I owe you an apology too. Grace studied him with a teacher's patience and a mother's caution. Then live one, she said. Do not just speak one. Ethan bowed his head. Not dramatically, not for effect. Simply because there was nothing higher in him left to defend. When he walked away, Naomi felt no triumph. Triumph would have kept him at the center. What she felt was release. The kind that enters quietly when an old room inside the heart is finally emptied of furniture that never belonged there. Outside the hotel, rain had begun to fall over Manhattan, soft and silver beneath the streetlights. Naomi helped Grace into her coat, then watched Talia run up holding 3 business cards from college mentors. And a smile too wide to hide. Miss Naomi, Talia said, breathless. I think tonight changed everything. Naomi looked back once through the glass doors. Ethan stood alone near the ballroom entrance, speaking to no one, holding no spotlight, finally small enough to become human. Then she turned toward the waiting car, toward her mother, her students, and the work ahead. No, sweetheart, Naomi said softly. Tonight only showed what was already changing. 3 months after the Human Dignity Awards, Naomi stood in the hallway of the new Brooks Dignity Learning Center, watching sunlight pour through windows that had once belonged to an abandoned insurance office on Fulton Street. The walls were freshly painted warm white. The floors still smelled faintly of pine and possibility. Down the hall, volunteers arranged folding chairs in the financial literacy room. College brochures lined a long table near the entrance, and Grace Brooks carefully taped a handwritten sign above the library door that read, "Every story deserves respect before it deserves attention." Naomi smiled when she saw it. Mama, that is not centered. Grace stepped back, tilted her head, and pressed the tape harder. Neither was my paycheck for 31 years, but I made it work. Naomi laughed, and the sound moved through the building like something finally returned to its rightful owner. The center had opened because of many hands. Teachers who gave Saturdays. Attorneys who reviewed documents after work. Parents who brought snacks. Students who painted bookshelves. Donors who learned to give without asking for their names in gold letters. Ethan's quiet transfer had been audited, accepted, and redirected entirely into student protection programs. Naomi never announced it. He never asked her to. That was the first sign that perhaps repentance, when real, does not arrive demanding applause. Still, the most symbolic gift came from something Naomi had once thought would be difficult to release. The wedding ring had stayed for months in the small porcelain bowl at Grace's kitchen, beside the peach cobbler recipe card, catching morning light without belonging to anyone. One rainy Tuesday, Naomi took it to a reputable jeweler in downtown Brooklyn. The man behind the counter asked if she wanted time to think. Naomi looked at the diamond, flawless and cold, and thought of all the ways people mistake price for value. I have thought long enough, she said. The money became the first endowment for the Grace Brooks Scholarship, created for young women pursuing education, social work, public service, and community leadership. Not because those fields were glamorous, but because they held up the parts of America that rarely appeared in luxury magazines. The first recipient was Talia. On opening day, she arrived in a cream blazer, her acceptance letter to Howard University folded carefully in her purse even though everyone had already seen it twice. She tried to act composed, but her hands kept fluttering near the scholarship certificate as if joy had become a bird inside her chest. The ceremony was simple. No crystal chandeliers, no corporate backdrop, no expensive stage lights. Just a community room filled with metal chairs, winter coats, proud families, paper cups of lemonade, and a sheet cake from the bakery downstairs. Naomi stood at the front, wearing black slacks, a soft blue blouse, and the kind of peace that does not need to be explained. Grace sat in the first row, dabbing her eyes before anyone had even begun speaking. When Talia's name was called, the room erupted. Her mother covered her mouth with both hands. Mr. Donovan clapped like he was at a championship game. Mrs. Alvarez shouted, "That is our girl." And nobody corrected her, because in that room, success belonged to everyone who had helped make it possible. Naomi handed Talia the certificate, then held her shoulders gently and looked into her eyes. "This scholarship is not a rescue," she said. "It is recognition. You worked for this. You earned this. And when you walk onto that campus, you do not go as someone lucky to be chosen. You go as someone prepared to contribute." Talia nodded, tears bright but unashamed. "I used to think powerful people had to open the door for me," she said. Naomi smiled. "Sometimes they do, but we are also allowed to build doors of our own." Later, after the cake was cut, and the room buzzed with conversations about dorms, majors, books, and summer jobs, Naomi stepped outside for a breath of cold air. Fulton Street moved around her in its ordinary rhythm. Buses sighing at the curb, sneakers on wet pavement, a father balancing grocery bags while his little boy pointed at pigeons, music drifting from a passing car. Her phone vibrated. A message from Ethan appeared on the screen. "Congratulations on the opening. The center looks beautiful. I will continue sending support through the attorney unless you ask me to stop. No press. No name." Naomi read it twice. Then she typed, "Thank you. Keep the students first." It was not forgiveness wrapped in romance. It was not a door reopening. It was a boundary with room for better behavior on the other side. That was enough. She returned inside just as Grace began telling Talia embarrassing stories about Naomi as a child, including the time she tried to organize a neighborhood library with 6 books and a shoebox labeled membership cards. Naomi pretended to be horrified, but her heart was full. Near the back wall hung 3 framed photographs. One of Grace in her classroom, one of the first 12 girls from the borrowed bakery office, one of the news center, taken that morning before anyone arrived. No photograph of Ethan, no wedding portrait, no image chosen to soften another person's ambition. Only truth, only roots, only work. As evening settled, the students gathered around Naomi for one final picture. Talia held her certificate. Grace held the scissors from the ribbon cutting. Naomi stood in the middle, not above them, not in front of them, but among them. The camera flashed, and for once, the image did not take anything from her. It gave something back. Later, when the building emptied and the chairs were stacked, Naomi walked through each room, turning off lights. In the library, she paused beside the window. Her reflection looked different from the woman who had once stood in a penthouse listening to her life come apart through a phone speaker. Not harder, not colder, more whole. She thought of Ethan, not with longing and not with anger, but with the quiet distance of someone finally free. From needing an apology to become herself again. She thought of the ring, now transformed into tuition, books, bus passes, application fees, and futures no one could wear on a finger. Grace appeared in the doorway with her coat over one arm. Ready to go home, baby? Naomi looked once more at the rows of books waiting for students who would arrive tomorrow, believing a little more in their own names. Yes, she said. I am ready. Outside, Brooklyn glittered under a soft evening rain. Not like Manhattan from 30 stories high. Not polished into a promise. Just real streets, real windows, real people carrying real hopes through the cold. Naomi locked the door and slipped the key into her pocket. She had lost a mansion and found a mission. She had walked away from a name and recovered her own. And somewhere between the life that used her and the life she built, Naomi Brooks learned the lesson she would spend the rest of her days teaching. Never beg to be respected. Build a life where disrespect has no place to stand.